My name's Tim. I'm a musician, a car collector, an automotive journalist, and a lover of all things automotive. I've bought and sold collectible cars for 2 decades, and I hope my experiences and my point of view helps you find the car of your dreams. The 1991 Aston Martin Virage is a product of pure emotion, of pure will, to bring to life an aluminum form that was the very epitome of gentleman's GT cruiser. And this car does that. It was launched at a time where gentleman GT cruisers were somewhat on the outs. This product of passion and purity was sadly overlooked. You saw an era where perfection, because of Lexus and Acura, had started to be what was required, and manufacturers like Ferrari and Aston Martin were slow to adapt to that. And they sort of stayed in this car on a jig, one man doing one thing, assembly line process, and almost destroyed the company as a result. Now, when it came to the heart of this car, it was a beautiful heart that sang an unbelievably exotic tune and was again the brainchild of Tadek Marek, who had brought to life the inline six that was so famous in those early Aston Martin cars. This time in communion with Reeves Callaway, of all people. And this Marek-Callaway hybrid brought together the most beautiful symphony of a V8 that produced over 325 horsepower. Now, one thing that's super interesting to me about this car, almost unbelievable, is that the Virage has managed to not appreciate in the face of a situation where every other Aston Martin vehicle before it and after it has easily trekked into 6 figures. This car was close to $300,000 new, and you have cars that were a fraction of that, obviously due to inflation. Cars like the DBS and the original V8 Vantage, and even the car that this morphed into with this same Callaway Marek engine, which ended up yielding huge power. In fact, there's even an Evo kit available for this Virage, where Aston Martin will fettle it to produce closer to 450 horsepower, in its final form being able to produce 650. It's an interesting car that is somewhat, in spite of itself, rudderless, in that it's ultra performance car. At the same time, it has the waftability of an older Bentley. I think it's one of those cars that is a serious sleeper in today's collector car market. If you look at the production numbers of each of the other cars I've mentioned, this is an extremely rare, extremely bespoke Aston Martin. From this angle, you can really see the car's ascending body line, and it's one of the things that I think makes these cars unique. Even in this era, you weren't seeing cars that had completely handmade bodies. And if you look at this quarter panel, this piece comes down here, and this is not part of the bumper. This is actually the fender. So this beautiful angle here. If you think about the way a clay molded car buck is formed, you can very much see that happening here. You can very much see the artist's hand in making the body of this car. And it's amazing because even with the impact bumpers that were required at the time, it's still a very flush look and beautiful, even though considering, like I said, that they're using these Scirocco taillights, and up front, they've really obscured the Audi 200 light so that you can't even really tell that it's an Audi 200 light. Let's take a look at that. Here we are at the front of the car, and you can see again where this fender is totally molded down in here to sort of accommodate this bumper. And the bumper has this beautiful piece formed, which sort of obscures and covers the Audi 200 headlight so that you don't really see the edge on either side of it. And I think that's kind of nice because even looking at this car from the front, you can't really tell where they source the light from. And I think that's a thing of beauty, because like when you're designing a car like this, and you have to, you're only going to make, a very small run of them. You can't very well have, a glass light made specifically for the car and still turn a profit. Same with the washer nozzle here. So these parts that were sourced yet still looks like its own, sort of has its own identity. I think that's beautiful. And you'll never guess which car it shares column stocks with. Let's take a walk over here. That's right, the Lotus Esprit. Similar wing mirrors, and also quality column stocks and mirrors from a Citroen CX, or even rear taillights from a Volkswagen Scirocco made it so that they could produce these cars in small numbers. Welcome to the sumptuous interior of this Aston Martin Virage. The 1991 Aston Martin Virage is a car that is very, very rare. Until maybe 6 or 8 years ago, I had actually never seen one in the flesh. And it's an interesting car. It's actually a little bigger than I would have thought it was. And it's one of those cars that really you have to see it to fully appreciate everything that's going on with the car. Everything's hand-stitched, handmade, and clearly if you've watched any of my videos, I put a high importance on that. One thing that's interesting with this car is, they only made, according to Aston Martin, and this is sort of a somewhat, accurate figure for the time, but they only made 388 of these cars. Purportedly only 12 are left-hand drive American vehicles, so only 12 manual transmission cars came to the States. A good number of them were automatic equipped. I think I saw a Lagonda decades before I saw one of these, and the Lagonda is by no means a ubiquitous car that you're going to see at every car meet that you attend. Fascinating car. The hallmarks of this car are that there are a lot of parts from other cars in this car. From the column stocks, which are shared with the Esprit you see in the background, and to the lights and those sorts of things. Things that aren't shared are the beautiful free-flowing dash in this car. It really does feel unique. It's certainly Aston Martin hallmark vehicle. I think it's, I'm going to probably say this 12 times in this video, but just it's one of those cars that, relative to how rare it is, and the performance and the horsepower and the way that it makes you feel, it just smells of fine leather in here, as it does in an Esprit or a Bentley of the era. I think it's one of those cars that's just very undervalued at the moment and misunderstood. I think the later supercharged Vantage, anytime you put two superchargers on something, that makes a big splash. But this car had 325 horsepower in an era where 325 horsepower was fairly exceptional. It does have a dogleg gearbox, and I think to have had one in my possession here for a little while has certainly been an enjoyable experience. Oh boy, this Aston Martin Virage. This is another one that when I was a kid, this car came out. And I remember reading about it in Car and Driver, I think it was Car and Driver magazine, 1990. I think it was actually 90. This is a 91, but I want to say that it might have been 1991. But this car, with the gas guzzler tax at the time, actually, I think the gas guzzler tax on this car was more than a Corrado. Like, that's how crazy expensive this car was. The car itself, with the gas guzzler tax and the regular tax that you pay, was, oh, that diff is so locked, was $300,000, or darn close to it. So, for context, like, an SL500 was $90,000. A Testarossa was like $130,000. So it was so much money, and Aston Martin was kind of like betting everything on it, because they really didn't have a car at the time. They made almost none of these. This is one of 12 in the United States with a manual transmission, and it feels so bespoke. Everything in here is like custom, one-off. It comes with a book that's like every fuse that's in the car, because I think, honestly, every car was a little bit different. They were building them at the time with, parts from other cars. The tail lights are from the Scirocco. The front lights are from an Audi 200. So it's just extremely like piecemeal, but at the same time hand-built aluminum body. Very unique car. The engine, actually, interestingly enough, if you think back at the time. You would think Cosworth would have been their go-to, but no, Callaway was their go-to. And this engine feels very exotic. It looks very exotic. Everything on the engine is, is a piece that's made specifically for this engine. So like in terms of like bespoke and rarity, this engine is shared pretty much with this and a version of it in the Lagonda. So extremely rare vehicles. And so the opportunity to even have this car, I've had it now for a little over a year, and just be able to look at it in the flesh, to drive it, to hear the horn. I mean, everything about it is just like sort of a childhood, a childhood dream sort of realized. In terms of like this car versus other things at the time, I mean, this is not better than any other car. I mean, a Fox body Mustang would have probably out-dragged it. This car is like 0 to 60 in 7 seconds. It's, for the time, is like a ton of power. It sounds very exotic. It revs out quick. But what a weird, what a weird car, right? I mean, it's one of those things where you buy this car because honestly, I think they're so undervalued for what it is. A rare hand-built British car, one of 12 with a manual transmission, with the provenance that comes with Aston Martin, even Callaway. These cars trading at under 100,000 currently absolutely makes no sense to me. I mean, this thing should be 150, maybe even one day $200,000 car, because it's just so rare and so unique. And I'm a fan. In terms of quality, hand-built cars, maybe it was quality at the time. If you back to that magazine article I mentioned, that car broke on the test drive. And there's a lot of things about this car that are hilarious. The trunk latch is essentially like a key that you would put in your locker at school. So it's in the 80s or 90s. And it definitely sounds good. People ask me what this car's like, and I honestly think it's like what it would have been like in the 90s to have a 4-cam Lusso Ferrari, a car from the 60s in the 90s. And in that way, this car is just so special. It imbues that feeling of quality and rarity in a way that like not much else does, particularly for the price point. These cars are still out there. The people I've met that own these cars know what they have. It's like they've discovered a pearl in an oyster and it's theirs alone. I think it's an opportunity to put one of these cars, or even the earlier DBS or earlier V8 Vantage, in your garage, because they're from an era that is completely gone. And the fact that these cars that are manual equipped are those big bruiser GT cruisers, I really dig it. Maybe you do too. And maybe the Aston Martin Virage could be the car of your dreams. Every downshift, every little nuance in the throttle is greeted with a new pop or a new zing and a new opportunity for you to just connect with the car and nature in a beautiful way. Oh. And
that's 5,000 RPMs. You just want to keep going.